Hello, my darlings, and welcome to 24 Days of Advent Adventure. Today is day 15, and I bring you a vampire story. Are they real? Are vampires real? Well, The Lady in Blue, Unidentified, by Terence Blacker, written in 1994, 30 years ago when I was 18. What a wonderful year 18 was. Loved it. Well, I'm going to read you a little bit of The Lady in Blue. Yes, I am. Not before I told you about it, though. Our writer, Mr. Terence Blacker, situates himself as the main protagonist in this story. He's been invited to stay at Oxburgh Hall over the Christmas time festivities. And as Terence hates the Yuletide festivities, he takes up Scholastic Publishing's offer to go stay at the most famous haunted tourist trap. Indeed, he does. Well, as he's been invited to stay there, this is just beyond bonkers, this story. Terence wants to prove to you that vampires don't exist, right? Vampires don't exist. What? You're not going to get a silent night with this book, are you? No. You're not going to get a silent night at all. And Terence, he's got this morbid fascination that he's going to disprove that vampires exist. Sometimes Terence, what can I say? Sometimes they just might exist. And you proving that they don't exist might get you into an awful lot of trouble, mightn't it? He's a children's writer, Terence, and he says vehemently, I am going to prove to you that vampires, blood-sucking monsters, do not exist, right? Sometimes, Terence, shut up and listen when the universe is trying to tell you something. You just sometimes have to sit down and listen. Oh, dearie me, this poor man, he's going to get more than he bargained for when he stays at Oxburgh Hall over the Christmas holidays. Oh, my dear. Be very aware of Margaret Challoner and her partner Joshua Spires. They're not to be trusted. They are not indeed. And in fact, be careful of everybody that works at Scholastic Publishings. Scholastic Publishings! Because the staff there are incredibly bony and incredibly weird, but they have very strange bloated qualities about them. Are they vampires too? Oh no! This is just the short story that's completely and utterly bonkers from start to finish. It's only a few pages long. You'll have it read in 5 minutes, but it's absolutely mad, and I love it. And I'll start and I'll read you a little bit. I write this report on Christmas Day in the library of Oxburgh Hall, an agreeable late medieval moated house in Norfolk, where I have been a guest for these past 5 days. By the end of this week, I am confident that my task will be complete. The vampires will be dead. No, please, don't be alarmed. I shall not, in these pages, be taking you into a spooky world of heebie-jeebies and hobgoblins. It is the myth of the vampire that I am here to slay. The farrago of fictional nonsense, fangs, long cloak, praised bloodlust, that shall be destroyed by the oldest weapon known to man, reason and logic, our old friend common sense. Because although I earn my living from writing books for children, for telling tales in school, as it were, I am essentially a man of fact. So when the publishers of this volume, Scholastic, challenged me to write a story that would disprove the existence of vampires, I was tempted. When the firm's editor, Mr. Forder, told me I would be required to spend a week over Christmas at the famous tourist haunt, Oxburgh Hall, I need no further encouragement. I have never been an enthusiast for the so-called Yuletide festivities, and the chance of escaping the season of jingle bell mummery and flummery by doing some research in an agreeable country house and being paid for the privilege was too good to miss. You see, I cannot abide superstition. The so-called paranormal is, in my humble opinion, nothing more than clutter, pointless mental clutter. And yet, as I learnt when arriving here by taxi from Downham Market Station, these ancient fears persist. The taxi driver, having accepted my fare, cast one glance at Oxburgh Hall, with its dim lantern hanging outside the gatehouse, a pale wintry moon glinting on the moat, and shuddered. "You wouldn't catch me staying there over Christmas, mate," he muttered. "Talk about a spooky atmosphere!" And before I could point out that without an atmosphere, i.e. the gaseous envelope of oxygen and nitrogen around planet Earth, we would all be in trouble. He had driven off, leaving me alone, my suitcase beside me, outside the great house. Whistling, I crossed the small bridge to the gatehouse, where I found by the porter's lodge a small doorbell. I pressed, and a distant tintinnabulation could be heard from the dark recesses of Oxburgh Hall. No lights came on, there were no distant footsteps from within the house, nothing to break the unearthly silence, not even, I jest, the sound of vampiric bats unfolding their wings. I pressed the bell again and waited. After a couple of minutes, I left my suitcase by the gatehouse and wandered into the courtyard. By now my eyes were accustomed to the darkness, and for a moment I took in the magnificence of the house which, illuminated by the moonlight, surrounded me. Even to one normally blind to architectural beauty, my family accuses me of being artistically impaired. The hall was an astonishing sight. For 5 centuries these buildings have belonged to the Bedlingham family, apart from a brief period in the 18th century when the house had been occupied by Sir Edmund and Lady Challoner. Margaret Challoner. Oh. It was around certain unhappy domestic events during these years that a wild vampiric mythology had grown. You don't say. "Mr. Blacker?" The voice from behind me interrupted my thoughts. I turned quickly, startled that someone could have appeared in the gatehouse without my hearing his approach. Standing by the door was a tall, broad figure, holding my suitcase. "Apologies," he said in a voice that seemed too frail and reedy for his size. I was in my room in the East Wing. Oh, it screams vampires. I stepped forward and introduced myself. My name is Gilbert Frank, he said. I am the caretaker. I'm relieved to see you, Mr. Frank, I smiled. For a moment I thought I'd been abandoned to the vampires of Oxburgh. Oh, careful, careful, Mr. Blacker. Laughing, we entered the hall by a small door to the left of the gatehouse. As he led me up some winding stairs, it occurred to me that the reason why stories had spread of supernatural presence at the Hall lay in the peace, gloom would be too strong a word, of the building itself. We made our way down a corridor before Frank opened the door, announcing almost like an old-fashioned butler, "Your room, Mr. Blacker." The bedroom in which I now stood was neither grand nor baronial, but a homely little affair, with a low sloping ceiling and a small window overlooking the moat and garden. It had once been a nursery, Frank informed me. I shall be serving dinner within 15 minutes, Frank said. You'll find the dining room across the courtyard beyond the gatehouse. Dinner? Dinner? Nothing elaborate, I hope. I like to cook. He certainly did, to my pleasure and astonishment. I was treated to a 3-course meal by candlelight in the panelled dining room. As I partook of the excellent vegetable soup, Frank really revealed that he had indeed once been a chef. Since his retirement, he had been employed part-time to look after the property during the close season, when no tourists visited. Retirement? I looked up from my soup in some surprise. Forgive me, but you seem rather young to retire. Frank inclined his head graciously. I am older than I look, he said, and unfortunately I have a rather delicate heart. My doctor advised me to escape the hurly-burly of the kitchen in favour of a less stressful occupation. I observed that I looked forward to enjoying his culinary skills over the Christmas holidays, especially over Christmas dinner. My remark seemed briefly to disconcert the caretaker. We do not celebrate Christmas at the Hall, he said quietly. A man after my own heart, I chuckled. It is one of life's mysteries why the world goes collectively mad at this time of year. Mad, yes, it is indeed. Frank smiled, as if amused by a private joke, then changed the subject of conversation. Presumably you'll be concentrating on the story of Margaret Challoner while you're here? Yes, a week I'm on the private papers, and I'll be able to put the famous vampires to rest for good and all. You seem remarkably confident, Mr. Blacker. Oh, I lay down the gauntlet of my challenge, sir. Of course I'm confident. You see, demystifying the so-called paranormal is something of a hobby of mine. I've already proved to my satisfaction that the original werewolves were nothing more than hungry wolves, who were seen by gullible villagers digging up graves for food. As for all those stories about ghosts arising from graveyards, it's clear to me that they were simply the bacterial glow produced by the decomposing flesh of corpses. Of course, vampires are rather more complex. So, as I was served my main course, some marvellous poultry dish, I expatiated upon my latest theory. The myth of the vampire, or as it was known in Romania, dated back to the plague. At that time, there was naturally an almost hysterical fear of death. Stories of ghosts tormenting entire villages, bodies were disinterred, examined, and what was found. Sometimes there was blood around the corpse's mouth. Its flesh seemed alive. When cut, blood still flowed. And science has an explanation for all these phenomena. I smiled. Of course it has. Victims of the pneumonic form of plague frequently bled around the mouth after death. As the lungs and viscera of the body expanded, blood was forced upwards towards the mouth. In cases of sudden deaths, which were said to have caused vampirism, the abrupt removal of oxygen from the bloodstream frequently meant that it wouldn't coagulate after death. Hence the running blood theory. What about the fangs and the long black cloak? Frank stood up and refilled my glass with wine. What about red-eyed creatures feasting on the jugular? Pure fiction. As it happens, traditional vampires were said to feast on the heart. I said it was Bram Stoker whose feverish imagination dreamt up the fangs and the neck idea. Before Count Dracula, the folkloric vampire was thought to be a bloated, ruddy-cheeked individual, putrescent, walking corpse in other words. Through my discourse, Gilbert Frank had listened politely, but now he seemed to wince queasily. How is the swan? He asked. Swan? I cooked swan for you tonight. I laughed appreciatively. Teachers and critics have been kind enough to comment on the humour of my stories, and I was glad to find that the caretaker was no stranger to zanies himself. Yes, the swan was excellent. Thank you very much. Later, well fed but tired, I made my way across the courtyard and upstairs, having bid my host a very good night. So this was a haunted house? To tell the truth, I had rarely felt more at home. Why, even the bed into which I slipped seemed warm and welcoming. Only once that night was my rest disturbed. Sometime in the early hours I was awoken by a soft weight upon my chest. It appeared that the house cat had adopted me. I smiled in the darkness before drifting off into the deepest of slumbers, the sleep of the dead, you might say. That, my darlings, is where I'll leave it, because I don't want to spoil the ending for you. But ooh, it's absolutely bonkers. It truly, truly is. It's an ending that you wouldn't have expected, but you're thoroughly going to enjoy it. Well, that's the end of day 15. I do hope you enjoyed it. Are vampires real? Who knows? Read this and find out. I'll say what I always do, my darlings. Happy readings and enjoy. If you like what I do, you can always give me a thumbs up. If you really like what I do, you can always give me a follow. Come back for day 16. Goodness knows what we're going to do. I'm sure it will be fun. Bye-bye.